Good afternoon or good morning to those joining us in Europe, and welcome to this online launch of a new report by ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, or APHR, titled Parliamentarians at Risk, Reprisals Against Opposition MPs in Southeast Asia in 2021. This report builds on the 2020 version of the report, documenting the increased threats faced by MPs in the region in the past year. This last year has seen a dramatic rise in the number of MPs detained across Southeast Asia, from just one in 2020 to 91 in 2021, and largely due to developments in Myanmar, where the military seized power in a coup in February. This year, governments also used responses to COVID-19 to unjustifiably silence democratic debate, including by bringing politically motivated cases against critics and lawmakers who express dissenting views. And also in this report, it says that judicial harassment against MPs continued in countries like Thailand and the Philippines, and escalated substantially in Malaysia, while online abuse and harassment of MPs continued at an alarming rate throughout the region. Before I introduce today's panel, just some quick housekeeping. Today's event will be followed by a question and answer session. And if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box right here. Priority will be given to the media, so please provide your name and your news outlet. The event will also be live streamed on APHR's Facebook page, and please post questions there, and we will have someone keeping an eye on those. You can also read this new report on APHR's website, and a link to it will be posted in the chat box shortly. If you have any questions after the event, or if you have any reason your question is not answered today, please email info@aseanmp.org or someone will get back to you as soon as possible. Now on to today's panel. Our first speaker will be Teddy Baguila Jr., a board member of APHR and a former Philippines MP and lawmaker. We're particularly grateful for Teddy for joining us today, and as over the last few weeks, we know he's been incredibly busy on the campaign trail as he's making a run for the Senate in the 2022 elections in the Philippines. We're also joined by MC Rangsiman Rome from Thailand. MP Rome is also an APHR member and has also kindly joined us in the middle of a parliamentary session. And as a result, he will be able to stay for the question and answer session. But we thank him very much for finding the time nonetheless. And finally, we're joined by Yati Tun from Myanmar, who was elected in the 2020 general election there, but has been forced into hiding as a result of the military coup there in February. She's joining us from an undisclosed location. And once again, we thank her very much for joining. Thank you very much for our speakers today. And for everyone who is watching online, I'll now hand over to our first speaker, Sir Teddy, who will present the report's main findings. However, before that, he'll be reading out a statement from Senator Laila de Lima, an APHR member who has been detained in the Philippines for almost 5 years, for the past 5 years. Teddy, over to you now.
Thank you, Jam. Good afternoon. Thank everyone for joining us today for the launch of this very important report, Parliamentarians at Risk, Reprisals Against Opposition MPs in Southeast Asia for the year 2021. Today, I will present the report's main findings, but before that, I would like to read out a statement handwritten in detention by my colleague and party mate, Senator Laila de Lima, who has been arbitrarily detained here in the Philippines for almost 5 years. To be exact, this is her 1,743rd day in unjust detention. Even during the early days of this administration, when nobody dared to speak out against the extrajudicial killings of the Duterte administration, there were only a few people who chose to remain in the opposition, as usually after the elections, everybody gravitates towards the administration party. And among the voices of dissent was Senator Laila de Lima, in fact, the most powerful voice of dissent against extrajudicial killings, trying to organize or conduct Senate hearings on the human rights abuses of this administration. And to make an example as to what extent the administration was willing to go to silence dissent, President Duterte and his minions fabricated Trump-up charges on flimsy evidence and had the Senator Laila De Lima incarcerated. So she is our inspiration in this fight. And now I would like to read her statement. Warm greetings of peace and solidarity from the Custodial Center of the Philippine National Police in Camp Crame, Quezon City. I congratulate and laud the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights in today's launching of its report on parliamentarians at risk, reprisals against opposition MPs in Southeast Asia in 2021. I express my deepest appreciation for the inclusion of my own struggles and present situation in the report, as I stand in solidarity with all the parliamentarians in Southeast Asia who are similarly situated or are in worse situations than I am. Indeed, the year 2021 is a dark year for human rights in our part of the world. The arrest, detention, and judicial harassment of one parliamentarian is one too many, and it affects all of us. I could not agree more with the report when it said, and I quote, "An attack on a parliamentarian is an attack on democracy." Democracy is indeed under attack. Democratic institutions have been weakened. Space for political discourses has been increasingly limited. Freedom of expression and assembly has been curtailed. Opposition parliamentarians have been jailed or are in hiding for fear of their lives and safety. Even the COVID-19 pandemic has been used as an excuse for the curtailment of the rights and freedoms of parliamentarians who are opposed to the powers that be. Worse still, the problem is as much of a pandemic as the COVID-19 virus is. A few days ago, I woke up to a startling, and I'm sure intentionally provocative title to an article published as the cover story of the Atlantic magazine. The title is "The Bad Guys Are Winning." And in it, the author used the story of an ordinary Belarusian woman, wife, mother, and former teacher turned reluctant defender of democracy and possible current president-elect to tell the progression of how autocrats the world over are winning the battle against democracy, human rights, and the rule of law by creating their own network of economic and political support to counteract the impact of sanctions while suppressing the spread of democracy. The author painted a stark picture of modern dictatorships, which I now quote with your indulgence. It says, "Nowadays, autocracies are run not by one bad guy, but by sophisticated networks composed of kleptocratic financial structures, security services, including the military, police, paramilitary groups, and surveillance, and professional propagandists. The members of these networks are connected not only within a given country, but among many countries. The corrupt state-controlled companies in one dictatorship do business with corrupt state-controlled companies in another. The police in one country can arm, equip, and train the police in another. The propagandists share resources. The troll farms that promote one dictator's propaganda can also be used to promote the propaganda of another. And themes pounding home the same messages about the weakness of democracy and the evil of America. It was a sobering read, to say the least, and not a little frightening. Though this may be a painting several decades in the making, its shades of darkness and foreboding elements have only been reaching vivid levels of realism in the short span of the last 10 years. Yet as daunting as this emerging reality may be, we do not have the luxury to cower in fear. Not now. Like si Vyatlana Chikanuskaya, who ran against a dictator and now lives in exile where her activist husband continues to languish in a Belarusian prison, though we may wake up scared every single morning, we must nonetheless face the rest of the day fighting against the enemy because there is no other choice. If democracy is to survive and thrive once again, we have to be no less adept at using our own networks of cooperation and skills sharing than those who have aligned themselves with the dark side of autocracy. For make no mistake, to them, this is a fight for survival. Even the likes of our wannabe Philippine dictator understands that defeat is not an option. For losing means he loses more than just power. It means accountability for his sins, the very thing that all these so-called strong-arm autocrats fear the most. Ms. Chikanovskaya may not be a parliamentarian, and she might not be from our region, but her experience and her fight is a mirror of our own. Nay, in fact, it is the same exact fight as our own. Could we then allow ourselves to be proven to be less sophisticated, less motivated, less adept at adapting to the requirements of this battle, and less able to reach out to those who share the same aspirations? No, we could not. The fight of our lifetimes is in the here and now. As we need each other, no matter where in the world our battlefronts are laid down, no matter our status in life, no matter the differences in our personal struggles, and no matter what platform we may have to speak our truth. For our part, we, parliamentarians at risk, understand very well that we are at a crucial stage of our political journey in our country's history. Where do we go from here? We push back and fight in our respective areas of influence amidst the challenges. We continue to demand accountability from those who govern, and with determination and strength of character, we forge ahead. APHR's report provides a comprehensive framework on what needs to be done at the country level, at the level of the ASEAN and its member states, and at the level of our international and ASEAN dialogue partners. What the report implicitly asks us to do is to heed its call for action. And if there's one thing that I wish to ask of you today, do not see me and my fellow parliamentarians at risk as mere victims of examples of what could happen to those who dare to fight abuses of power. We remain your active fellow defenders. By whatever means are within our power, we continue to be willing and able defenders of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That is my personal pledge, which I am certain is shared by everyone who not only values democracy for what it is, but understands the long-term perils of the alternative. Again, thank you and congratulations to APHR for this report. I appreciate your recommended framework for the next steps and will use it to prioritize the things that I still need to do as a parliamentarian. I will heed your call and continue to forge ahead, as I always do, to protect the rights and freedoms of opposition parliamentarians, to which I so proudly belong. Let me end this message by again reiterating what I said and is quoted in your report. Even as I fight my own battle for freedom, I cannot but also join the struggle of our people against injustice and oppression. My battle since 2016, when I was persecuted and then imprisoned, goes hand in hand with the people's, and now I include Southeast Asian opposition parliamentarians, struggle for justice and progress. So that was Senator Lila's very impassioned and powerful statement, handwritten, because she does that so often from inside her jail cell in Camp Crame, Philippines. And now on to the key findings of this report, which, as Senator Laila de Lima has mentioned, highlights the grim state of human rights and democracy in our region, and which includes threats to MPs. In the last year, we have seen a dramatic rise in the number of MPs detained across Southeast Asia, from just 1 in 2020 to 91 in 2021, largely due to developments in Myanmar, where the military seized power in a coup in February. Scores of other MPs in Myanmar have been driven into hiding, where they remain at risk of arrest. Elsewhere in the region, governments used their responses to COVID-19 to unjustifiably silence democratic debate, including by bringing politically motivated cases against critics and lawmakers who express dissenting views. In Malaysia, COVID-19 was used as an excuse to suspend election and parliament for more than 7 months as part of apparent efforts to keep an unpopular government in power. Judicial harassment against MPs continued in countries like Thailand and in the Philippines, and escalated substantially in Malaysia. Legal cases rarely lead to convictions, but are instead filed to harass and muzzle freedom of expression. Online abuse and harassment of MPs continued at an alarming rate throughout the region, often through coordinated disinformation campaigns. This report, released today by APHR, provides an overview of human rights abuses against elected lawmakers in Southeast Asia. The findings in 2021 are stark, and APHR must unfortunately report that the situation facing MPs has only deteriorated further. The coup in Myanmar is the most dramatic example of a wider trend of closing democratic space in the region. In countries where APHR has previously documented abuses against MPs, such as Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand, authorities continued to level baseless criminal charges against opposition MPs, while often also being implicated in or failing to prevent or effectively investigate threats, online abuse, and disinformation campaigns against lawmakers. In 2021, the resurgence of COVID-19 pandemic in the region also served as an apparent excuse to justify the silencing of democratic debate, either by targeting lawmakers exercising their freedom of expression to scrutinize official measures, or by suspending parliament, as was the case in Malaysia. I'll allow my colleagues on the panel today to discuss the situation in Myanmar and Thailand, while I speak a little about the situation in Malaysia and here in my country, the Philippines. For Malaysia, in January, the government of then Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin used the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext to impose a state of emergency, followed by the suspension of parliament for more than 7 months. Meanwhile, legal harassment of opposition MPs rose alarmingly in the context of a wider crackdown on freedom of expression. Under the emergency ordinance introduced in January, authorities were granted sweeping powers. This included allowing the suspension of sitting of parliament and state assemblies until a time set by the king, while elections were also suspended indefinitely. This emergency declaration came on the back of steps already taken by the government in 2020 to limit some democratic processes due to COVID-19, including by shortening the November-December parliamentary sitting and postponing regional elections. These sweeping restrictions were widely condemned as a disproportionate response to the public health crisis, and many accused the government of attempting to protect its loose grip on power while avoiding legislative scrutiny. The state of emergency was eventually lifted in all states except Sarawak on August 1, and the Malaysian parliament reopened its first full session of the year in mid-September. At the same time as this state of emergency, respect for fundamental freedoms in Malaysia also deteriorated sharply after the Perikatan National Coalition came to power following backdoor maneuverings in March 2020. Human rights groups have since documented an alarming rise in baseless criminal proceedings against a range of real or perceived opponents, and this includes the political opposition. APHR has documented an increase in judicial harassment of MPs since the PN coalition took office, and this trend continued and in fact intensified in 2021. Authorities targeted MPs who spoke out not only against a state of emergency, but also in defense of human rights more generally, using the same repressive legislation used to try and silence other human rights defenders, journalists, and other activists. As APHR has previously documented, these cases rarely lead to convictions, but are instead filed to harass and drain time and resources from MPs. In the context of this wider crackdown on dissent taking place in Malaysia, the increase in judicial harassment of MPs is a concern, and we call on Malaysia's new government to end these undue restrictions and the targeting of MPs immediately. For the Philippines, there are also significant concerns in the Philippines, particularly ahead of next year's elections. Here we have seen disinformation campaigns, threats, and the so-called red tagging of opposition lawmakers increase alarmingly ahead of the election. President Rodrigo Duterte and other senior officials have made baseless accusations against left-wing lawmakers, claiming that they support an armed communist insurgency. Such accusations can have devastating consequences for those accused and have in the past been linked to the murder of government critics. Also in the Philippines, online abuse and disinformation against lawmakers remains widespread. While the government has denied involvement in such campaigns, media outlets and others have documented how disinformation campaigns appear to be orchestrated by the Duterte administration. Much of this abuse is highly misogynistic in nature, targeting female lawmakers with sexist language and threats. This continued harassment, both online and judicial, of opposition MPs in the build-up to next year's elections is concerning and has wider impacts for the fairness of the vote. We heard earlier from Senator Laila de Lima, and her continued imprisonment is a damning symbol of the Duterte administration's wider clampdown on dissent. As next year's election approaches, for the people of the Philippines to be able to freely choose their own future, these restrictions on freedom of expression must end immediately. Although not featured in detail in this report, there have been deeply concerning developments in Cambodia, where the Prime Minister has ruled an effective one-party state since the main opposition party was arbitrarily disbanded in 2017. In 2021, authorities relied on a politicized judiciary to continue to level baseless charges against former opposition lawmakers and members of the opposition, including several exiled leaders. In conclusion, Parliaments and parliamentarians can play crucial roles in promoting human rights, but to do so, they must be free to exercise their mandates without fear of reprisals. Indeed, an attack on a parliamentarian is an attack on democracy. As the space for democracy in ASEAN recedes increasingly every year, it is crucial that governments across our regions and others take immediate steps to better protect the human rights of all parliamentarians. This report includes a number of recommendations to a range of stakeholders here in Southeast Asia and further afield about what actions they can take to help protect the human rights of MPs in the region. And with that, help continue to the improved situation for human rights and democracy here in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Teddy. And thank you very much for reading out that very powerful statement from Senator Laila de Lima. Next up, we have MP Ranciman Rome, who will be talking about the threats faced by MPs in Thailand.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Hi, sir. Good afternoon.
Thank you to everybody who joined with us and for this important opportunity for me to sharing specific threat to MPs in Thailand today. As this report rightly point out, opposition lawmakers across Southeast Asia are facing increased threats and harassment from Myanmar and right across our region to the Philippines and many other places in between. Sadly, I also have to report that opposition MPs in particular are at risk here in Thailand, where this year we have seen authorities continue to harass and threaten lawmakers from my own party, the Move Forward Party. This harassment has come in the form of trumpet up criminal charges, as well as coordinated online information operations. Let's not forget that the Move Forward Party was formed after its predecessors, the Future Forward Party, was dissolved by Thailand Constitutional Court in February 2020. Having performed surprisingly well in the election held a year earlier and posing a threat to the political establishment. Future Forward, this solution was a major factor in the rise in the youth protests we are seeing in Thailand today. Unfortunately, as these mainly young people call for change to the deeply entrenched political establishment in Thailand, instead of listening to this voice, authorities are responding in a harsh measure, severely curtailing the climate of freedom of expression for Thai people. Among those targeted have been current and former opposition MPs, and a number of my colleagues have faced charges under a range of law, including defamation, the lèse-majesté law, as well as the Computer Crime Act. Those who lost their status as MPs when the Future Forward Party was dissolved last year have also been the targets of judicial harassment. Under this military regime since 2014 coup d'etat, I was arrested many times as a student activist who opposing the military junta. Authorities placed charge against me mostly for the public assembly because I was organizing the protest. Also eventually jailed for campaigning against the constitution draft that the military regime attempted to push. Thailand had been stuck in a cycle of military coup over and over, and this unhealthy political cycle must end. Unfortunately, 2014 military coup regime who must give back the power to the people immediately, not just spend about 5 years in the power. They join the election that they make to legitimate their power. It might be undercalculated for the military regime that Future Forward Party is the third most majority elected to represent the people in the parliament seats. As a threat to the military power, they did everything to ban Future Forward Party. So that's what they try to do to newly form Move Forward Party, who not just formally an oppositional party, but practically opposing the military regime. As a current MP of Move Forward Party myself, I face several more cases for speak up against military regime abuse of power. I have been sued for defamation after implicating Deputy Prime Minister in corruption after my first motion of no confidence, which could lead to a 2-year jail sentence if found guilty. Second motion of no confidence exposed another government corruption lead to attempt of harassment to me and my family, which I will give more information after. Third motion of no confidence, I again have been sued for defamation against private company who have the relation with the minister about public interest issue. These cases against us MPs are quite clearly aimed at intimidating us and trying to force us into silence. They are also a very significant burden, taking time and effort to find and draining resources away from our ability and responsibility to fulfill our mandates as representatives of the people. Must spend this energy, time, and effort to fix society justice problem and improve welfare of society, not facing unnecessary kind of intimidation from authorities. A number of MPs have also spoken about being the targets of surveillance by authorities. And this is something that has been documented in the past by APHR. In August, an alleged wallet was leaked to the media featuring more than 180 individuals under surveillance by the government. And these include journalists, activists, as well as several current and former lawmakers from Future Forward Party and Move Forward Party. 2 15-year-old girls, and also myself, although the government denied its authenticity. Separately, in August, one former MP reported finding a GPS under her car. As a representative of the people in legal position, oppositional MPs ourselves have no safety guarantee to exercise freedom of expression, questioning the power of the military government. How about the citizen with no legal position and less spotlight? Activists got so many kind of threats, physical violence such as car explosion cases, arrested, even kidnapped happened just last year. Currently, I propose and push prevention and suppression of torture and enforced disappearance bill, which is currently being debated in the House of Representatives. Consider this extraordinary human rights crime can happen to anyone. This is such a huge concern. I and my family have been subjected to harassment and intimidation as well. As I mentioned about exposed another government corruption in February this year during my second motion of no confidence, even though so far no charge against me. But I received some signal of threat. Considering this state of violence have no safety guarantee for the people, I need to get a bodyguard and move to safe house with my family for a while to protect ourselves while keep doing my duty as an MP. A few months later, there are two strangers tried to reach my wife by asking access to our room from our residence staff, but found their reason does not make sense and immediately report to me. Later on, got a suspicious phone call to my wife. After searching information from CCTV footage, it's confirmed those strangers are plainclothes intelligence officers with fake license plate car number. This information also confirmed by district police station. The risk to speak out about abuse of power come at a personal cost, not just me, but also my wife have to live under risk. Ever since which bring great disturbance to our daily mobility. Authority attempt to intimidating opposite voice by harass a person or their family member. It is clear there is a concerted and systematic attempt to both discredit and silence opposition MPs in Thailand. Despite this threat, harassment, and even personal costs involved, I and my colleagues will continue our work and to challenge the political establishment here in Thailand, as well as to promote a human rights agenda and a fair society for all. Considering we all have the same goal, to fight any violence against human rights, I sincerely ask any kind of support in all of our power and limitation we have, which very important for this community to give to each other, than for us to bring systematic change to our country, to our world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, MP, and I hope everything is well with you and your family. Thank you for speaking to us about the important update about the challenges faced by Thai MPs. We know that you have to return to your parliamentary sitting. So again, we thank you very much for your finding the time despite your very busy schedule. Our final speaker thank you so much, sir, and good afternoon. Our final speaker this afternoon is Yati Datun, who will be speaking about the challenges she and her fellow MPs have faced since the military launched its coup in Myanmar in February. She will make her presentation in English, but for the question and answer, she will be speaking through a moderator. Hello, ma'am, and good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you to everybody who was joining us today for this report launch. And thank you, APHR team, for your support. And also thank you to my fellow MPs from Philippines and Thailand. I really appreciate you. First of all, I would like to say that this is the report that really reflected the risk of member of parliament across our ASEAN country, including Myanmar. Now, I'm speaking to you today far from my home and the place where I have been since shortly after the military coup on the 1st of February. On the day in question, I was in our country's capital, Naypyidaw, ready to be sworn into parliament after I was elected as a member of parliament representing number 8 Amyotadado constituency in Mon State during the 2020 election held last November. Having been elected for my second term, I was ready to return to parliament and also prepared to contribute to the democratization process of my country after decades of dictatorship. However, the military coup destroyed all those dreams and hopes. Shortly after coup, I joined other fellow members of parliament to form the committee representing CRPH, which was mandated by 298 members of parliament, going to represent the democratic will expressed by our people in the 2020 general election. A few days after the coup, I returned my home to represent my constituents. At the time, the situation were very tense. The soldiers were everywhere, and even their mere presence seriously threatened the people. Our local NLD offices were surrounded by soldiers. The military started to arrest the members of parliament across the country. I therefore had to move to the jungle area for my survival. As you know, everyday life is with many limitations in the jungle, while the military drones were constantly circling overhead. Up to this date, I still have to move places every few days to avoid arrest. With junta forces also interrogating and even torturing family members or those on their wanted list. I have been forced to cease all communication with my friends and family back home. I cannot risk anyone I love for my political activities. As difficult as my circumstances are, I'm far from alone. Since the coup, scores of lawmakers have gone into hiding, while an estimated 121 MPs have been detained and remain in prison as we speak, including President U Win Myint and State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. Those imprisoned face serious risk of torture at the hands of the military's notorious security forces. And those released since the coup have described witnessing mock executions, beatings, and sexual violence. On the top of torture, medical care is also very poor in Myanmar's prisons. And the UN estimates that at least 50 people have died in detention since the coup. One of them was a fellow MP, Unyon Shui, who passed away from COVID-19 in August after being held in an overcrowded prison for 6 months without adequate care. Despite these struggles, we continue our resistance to the military. Throughout the country, millions of people have demonstrated every day that they totally reject this order and demanded that the votes they cast in 2020 general election be respected. We MPs are doing our part through the formation of the CRPH. Their CRPH then formed the National Unity Consultative Council, NUCC, which approved the Federal Democracy Charter and after abolishing the 2008 Constitution, has formed the National Unity Government, NUG, which includes elected members of parliaments, ethnic representatives, and civil society. We truly represent Myanmar people. The military junta has no interest whatsoever to work for the people and the country. They instead work very hard just go to grasp power and advance their vested interests, nothing more. As democratically elected representatives of the people, the members of parliament and CRPH are determined to strive for an ambiguous victory of our Spring Revolution. With that in mind, not only have we united many ethnic groups together, but also supported the civil disobedience movement, CDM, which is one of the cornerstones of our revolution. While the military junta failed to provide services to the people and committed atrocities, including recognizing the COVID-19 pandemic, the CRPH and NUG are committed to work for the people we represent, especially providing necessary health care to prevent COVID-19. Our current works indeed highlight the crucial role of lawmakers in democracy, promoting democracy, human rights, and accountability. When democracy returns to Myanmar, and I'm convinced it will, our new parliament will be totally free from any authoritarian interference. Military must go back to the barracks. The members of parliament suffer from the notorious persecution of the military junta, including life threats, illegal arrest, and illegal confiscation of properties. Therefore, we are now working together to form the self-help program to provide immediate support for each other in this difficult time. I speak to you today, urging the international community to do everything in its power to help end this assault on democracy in my country. We must see an arms embargo and targeted sanctions against all those responsible for this deadly campaign of terror and violence we are continuing to witness at the hands of junta forces. Other countries, in particular ASEAN member states, must now start publicly accepting the CRPH and the NUG as the true representatives of the Myanmar people, and denying the gender the legitimacy they so desperately crave. The Myanmar people have said loud and clear since the coup that they demand democracy, and the world must now stand by them and take every action possible to see our country back on the democratic path. In order this dream to be fulfilled, lawmakers must be able to do their jobs without fear of reprisals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that message from us, and I hope that you keep safe wherever you are. In the interest of time, obviously, I'd like to get started with the questions, and we're receiving quite a few questions here. I'll start off with from Charlotte McCann of Economist. Clearly, there has been a dramatic spike in attacks and threats against MPs in Myanmar as a result of the coup. Are MPs in other countries being targeted and harassed more frequently than they were in the past? I think this question can be obviously answered by you, ma'am, but at the same time, Teddy can also respond to this. Teddy, are you there?
Oh. Yeah. Okay, well, the case of the Philippines, there was a time when red tagging was reserved for activists. Now it includes indigenous peoples who have been protesting against the displacement from the ancestral lands, or farmers who have been asking for the repeal of certain oppressive laws like the rice certification law in the Philippines. But now, even opposition lawmakers who have been ventilating the grievances of these basic tech sectors are also being targeted. And this goes hand in hand with the propaganda machine of this administration that, of course, demonizes dissent, demonizes activism, saying that communism is bad, and that the opposition candidates who ventilate grievances, legitimate grievances of the sectors, are connected to the communist insurgency, communist movements. And because the red tagging hasn't really resulted to proper charges, legal charges against these opposition lawmakers, most of them are subjected to possible assassination attempts, which is happening all over the Philippines. The extrajudicial killings in the name of the drug war has expanded to random or wanton assassination attempts against even lawmakers or activists or even lawyers defending the rights of indigenous peoples, of farmers, of journalists, or those who are under attack by this administration. So now no one is safe from the red tagging and the resultant threats on life or harassments. Even lawmakers, used to enjoy parliamentary immunity are now subjected to trumped-up charges. And I go back to what happened to Senator Laila de Lima, because when she was incarcerated, it really was a chilling effect to many lawmakers and politicians who were part of the opposition. So yeah, we have really experienced a dramatic increase in threats and harassments against MPs over the past 5 years under this Duterte administration.
Ask you more about the importance of the 2022 elections, but first I'd like to go back to Miatida and just to ask her, because she spoke about MPs getting sick and actually even a death in jail. Do you guys think though that the pandemic has made it even easier for those in power, those in government, to use it as a tool or an excuse to restrict access and visits from lawyers and doctors? I mean, is it something that you've heard from your colleagues in Myanmar?
So, please let me say in Myanmar. So, tomorrow, the challenges data nyaswa shi bare tomorrowနိုင်ငံမှာအာဏာသိမ်းပြီးတဲ့အချိန်ကနေဒီနေ့ဒီချိန်အထိပေါ့နော်တစ်ဖက်မှာလည်းကျမတို့မှာဒီကိုဗစ်ကပ်ရောဂါကိုလည်းတပြိုင်တည်းရင်ဆိုင်နေရတယ်ပေါ့ဒီခါမှာကျမတို့ဒီလွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေရဲ့အနေအထားဟာစစ်တပ်ကနေအကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ကနေပြီးတော့မှလိုက်လံနှောက်ယှက်ဖမ်းဆီးတာကိုလည်းရှောင်တိန်ရတယ်တစ်ဖက်မှာလည်းကိုဗစ်အနေနဲ့ရင်ဆိုင်ရတယ်အဲ့တော့စစ်တပ်ကနေဖမ်းဆီးထိန်းသိမ်းခြင်းမခံရဘဲနဲ့လွတ်မြောက်လာတဲ့လွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေကတော့ကျမတို့အသက်အန္တရာယ်ကတော့လွတ်မြောက်တယ်ဒါပေမဲ့ကိုဗစ်ရောဂါနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ကိုဗစ်ကူးစက်ခံရတဲ့အခါမှာကျမတို့ကုသနိုင်ဖို့အတွက်ခွင့်လန်းနေမရှိဘူးခက်ခဲတွေများစွာရှိတယ်ဥပမာကျမ highlight တက်ရမယ်ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ကျမတို့တနင်္လာရီတိုင်းကလွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တော်တင်တင်ရီဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လေရှောင်းတိန်နေရင်းနဲ့မှကိုဗစ်ရောဂါကူးစက်ခံရပြီးတော့တည်ဆုံးသွားတယ်ပြီးတော့ဒီကျမတို့ထောင်ထဲကိုရောက်သွားတဲ့လွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေဆိုရင်လည်းခုနကျမဒီ highlight လုပ်ပြတဲ့ဦးညွှန့်ရွှေဆိုလို့ရှိရင်လည်းထောင်ထဲမှာဒီကိုဗစ်ရောဂါကိုကုသခွင့်ပေါ့နော်ကောင်းကောင်းမွန်မွန်ကုသခံရခြင်းမရှိဘဲနဲ့တည်ဆုံးသွားတယ်ပေါ့နော်အဲ့တော့ကျမတို့ရဲ့ဒီလွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေရဲ့ challenges ဟာနှစ်ဖက်ခံစားနေရတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်စစ်တပ်အကြမ်းဖက်စစ်တပ်ရဲ့လိုက်လံဖမ်းဆီးနှောက်ယှက်ခြင်းကိုခံရတယ်လို့တစ်ဖက်ကကိုဗစ်ရောဂါရဲ့အန္တရာယ်ကိုလည်းတပြိုင်တည်းခံစားနေရတာဖြစ်ပါတယ်။ဒါပေမဲ့ကျမတို့ဒီဟာတွေပုံမှာတော့ကြံ့ကြံ့ခံပြီးတော့ရင်ဆိုင်ကျော်လွှားနေရပါတယ်။ကျေးဇူးတင်ပါတယ်။
So, for the members of parliaments in Myanmar, we can say that the risks are much more than before, and the risk is not only by the military regime or by the SAC after the coup. We also face the challenges of the COVID pandemic issues, because as I also mentioned in my presentations, so the MPs after 2020 elections, most of them are under the threats of the arbitrary detention by the SAC, and also at the same time we are facing with the COVID pandemics. So people, the MPs like us who are now away from the military detentions or the arbitrary arrested, are likely to face the COVID pandemic issues again in these situations. I would like to express one example about our members of parliament colleagues who was elected from the Thailand region, and she been hiding from the SAC from arbitrary arrested, and at the same time when she was away from all the medical care, she being infected by the COVID pandemic and she passed away. So because at that times there is no proper medical care for the MPs and there is nothing happening for them. And also at the same times in the prisons, we also facing the same with the health problems. So we can say that this year, Myanmar parliaments are facing a lot of challenge and threats, not only by the SAC, also by the pandemic issues. And we, as member of parliament, we still struggle and face all the challenges, and will be together with the people of Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that translation. I'd stick with you for a moment with another question. Two questions actually, which I'll just combine. There was a question there about what can be done. What can be done basically in the, okay, here you go. For the panel, the situation in Myanmar is quite unique with democratically elected MPs in hiding. In this situation, how can MPs in the region practically offer solidarity and support? And then I'll connect that with another question. So other MPs in the region, and then what steps can the CRPH and NUG take to improve their prospects of being recognized as the legitimate government of Myanmar? The second question is anonymous, and the first question, we've seen it online. So are you able to translate that for ma'am, please?
Yep. So tuga mekong na kugo ta chapang mi me tha bare patama mekong ga lat ja ro di Myanmar ga lat shi ane tha ma ko salai de ga pong shang ne ya de ane tha de shi de ai lo ane tha de ma di ko data de de ma shi de ko salai de ne blo myo ပူးပေါင်းဆောင်ရွက်မှုတွေပတ်မိုးကူညီမှုတွေလုပ်နိုင်မလဲဆိုတဲ့မေးခွန်းကပထမတစ်ခုပါနောက်ထပ်မေးခွန်းတစ်ခုကတော့ဒီ CRPH နဲ့ NUG ရဲ့ recognition ပေါ့နော်ဆိုတော့ဒီအထောက်ပံ့ရနိုင်မှုနိုင်ငံတကာရဲ့အသိအမှတ်ပြုနိုင်ရနိုင်မှုနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဘယ်လိုမျိုးထင်ပါတယ်လဲဆိုတဲ့မေးခွန်းပါရှင်ဟုတ်ဆိုတော့ဒီပထမဆုံးပေါ့နော်ကျွန်မဒီနိုင်ငံတကာအထောက်ပံ့တွေဘယ်လိုရနိုင်မလဲဆိုတဲ့ဟာလေးကိုတော့ကျွန်မအနေနဲ့အင်္ဂလိပ်လိုပြောချင်တယ် So for the first part sorry ma နည်းနည်းပြန်မေးလိုက်မယ်နော် For the first part about the international recognition she will directly answer in English. It is such as coincidence that we got very good news today from New York, and the UN Credential Committee rejected the submission of the SAC regarding the permanent representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Uchamoto is a legitimate representative of Myanmar at the UN since he was appointed by the elected civilian government. According to today's news, I'm very confident the Ambassador Uchamoto will continue serving Myanmar people at the UN as a legitimate representative of our country. Of course, the National Unity Government NUG of Myanmar is a legitimate government as it was mandated by the members of parliaments who are elected in the 2020 general election. There is no doubt, and NUG has the democratic legitimacy representing the democratic will of the people of Myanmar. At the same time, I'm aware of the challenges of the international system in regards with giving recognition to another country's government, especially at the time of political crisis. But we will meet those challenges together with our people. We are determined to strive for what is rightfully ours. That is, government of the people, by the people, for the people. CRPH has met with European Parliament and other parliaments in P2P, and we will continue working with our counterparts from other countries to get the official recognition from other parliaments and government. ကျမတို့တခြားလွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်ဘယ်လိုဆက်သွယ်အလုံးလုံးနေလဲဆိုတော့အခုကကျမတို့ရဲ့အားသာချက်တစ်ခုကနည်းပညာပေါ့နော်နည်းပညာဆိုတော့ကျမတို့ဒီ Zoom ကနေတစ်ဆက်ပေါ့နော် internet access ကနေရရှိတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့လို့ကျမတို့အခုလိုမျိုး Zoom တွေကနေပြီးတော့ကျမတို့တွေ့ရှိရတယ်ဆက်သွယ်ဆောင်ရွက်ကြတယ်ဥပမာဆိုရင်ကျမတို့ဒီ CRPH member တွေဟာအတူတူရှိနေတာမဟုတ်ဘူးတနေရာစီတကွဲတပြားစီရှိနေတယ်သို့တော်လည်းပဲတနေရာတကွဲတပြားစီရှိနေတဲ့နေရာကနေပြီးတော့မှအခုလိုမျိုးကျမတို့ online ကနေတဆင့်ပေါ့နော်အလုပ်တွေကိုစုစုစီစီနဲ့
တက်ဆွမ်းသမျှကျမတို့ရုန်းကန်စူးစမ်းပြီးတော့အလုပ်လုပ်နေကြတယ်အလားတူပဲကျမတို့ CRPH အဖွဲ့ဝင်မဟုတ်တော့ကျမတို့ကိုနောက်ကနေပြီးတော့ mandate ပေးထားတဲ့လွှတ်တော်ကိုယ်စားလှယ်တွေနဲ့လည်းပဲကျမတို့မှာချိတ်ဆက်ပြီးတော့ online ကတည်းကဆောင်ရွက်နေပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ကျမတို့ဒီတနေရာစီရှိနေတဲ့အခက်အခဲတွေကိုတော့ကျမတို့ဒီနည်းပညာအကူအညီတွေနဲ့ကျမတို့ဆောင်ရွက်ပြီးတော့ကြော်လွှားနေပါတယ်
So for the second questions about how MPs are working together in solidarity and support, so I would like to mention that technology is the best benefit for this current situations. Yeah, we all are being away from each other and hiding in different places. Even for the CRPH members, we are not still together, but we can walk through the technology. So by Zoom applications, we can meet and we can have like regular conversations to each other, and we can walk the things that we have to do. And also for the other members of parliament who are not directly in the CRPH but providing the mandate to the CRPH, so we also have like conversations between our MPs and the CRPH member and between each other using the technological like benefits. So we are in keep contact with each other, and we try to have like more support and solidarity between among us using the technological benefits. But still, we have a lot of challenge of not physically being together. But we are moving forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to go back to Teddy. Ted, how critical do you think the 2022 elections will be when it comes to rolling back on changes that have been made? How much do you think is this information going to play into the election results? And do you think though that, as you see, we've seen how of course, we're quite aware how journalism, human rights have been in many ways smeared and demonized by even those who are in power here in the Philippines. But how critical do you think elections will be? And do you think we can take back what's been lost and salvage what we can over the next 6 years, again, with the new administration coming up?
Thank you, Jam. Well, not to be too melodramatic, but the coming elections would simply be a battle between good and evil. There are a lot of people in the Philippines who are really desperate, and if the administration ticket wins, many are opting to go overseas and leave the country. It will be an exodus of Filipinos. We have the current dispensation winning again. If you look at the current administration ticket, it is a combination of the scion of a former dictator, the scion of the current dictator, a former president who was convicted of plunder, and another former president who was charged with charges of corruption, but who was exonerated by this administration. So it's really the evil empire versus the democratic forces. And the sad thing is they enjoy popular support. It seems that many Filipinos, perhaps even in the Southeast Asian region, are starting to lose the value of democracy and freedom, because of the misinformation coming largely from social media. As Senator Laila de Lima aptly put it, the troll armies of these administrations, of these autocratic regimes, have been able to brainwash the general public into believing that these autocratic regimes are actually liberal democracies. What we have in Southeast Asia, whether it's in Malaysia or in Thailand or in the Philippines, are authoritarian regimes masquerading as democracies. So it's really very crucial to win the propaganda battle, social media. I do feel that there are enough enough Filipinos. And maybe in a way or in a sense, the pandemic has opened the eyes of a lot of Filipinos that the autocratic regime of President Duterte, who has failed to adequately respond to the challenges of pandemic, doesn't work for us. Because for a while, people were saying, oh, corruption is something that's really endemic in the region, in the Philippines, something that we can accept for as long as the president is very popular, for as long as the president has all of these, populist programs of giving aid to people. And their propaganda machine was able to brainwash people into believing this. But now people are suffering because of the pandemic, and they've started to realize that this inept and corrupt government has failed in its promise 5 years ago. And so we are really very hopeful that we have this organic mushrooming of volunteers supporting the true opposition. And we hope that this volunteer-led fund sourcing campaign, crowd fund sourcing campaign, will bring us to victory in 2022. And may I make a last point regarding this? That's why I say it's a battle between good and evil. In the case of Senator Laila de Lima, who has been unjustly incarcerated, we feel that another win by this administration in 2022 will mean continued detention for Laila de Lima. There are other tickets, there are other presidential candidates. We tried to negotiate with them, but they have been non-committal in releasing Laila de Lima, even if they feel that the charges or the evidence is flimsy. So we really believe that the only way that Laila de Lima can be released, the only way that we can bring back the rule of law and due process is for us to win the elections in 2022. So that's how crucial the elections for 2022 is in the Philippines.
Teddy, we've also seen a pattern in the Philippines, right? Which was followed by 2016, this gaming of the electoral system. Filing for candidacy and then withdrawing, played before the general public. And as mentioned previously, and I mentioned it before, it's not just a fight between political parties. This is about warring political families, and it's quite dramatic in a way that even from a country that has always had this kind of trouble, it is unprecedented. And the situation in Myanmar also has been unprecedented. And so we just hope that the situation will improve. In the Philippines, the closure of ABS-CBN, it's just one crucial example of it is unlikely that ABS will open if it's going to be from the winners of the 2022 elections will be coming from the administration. And as you know, those who are listening, ABS-CBN is the biggest media network in the country, forcibly closed by allies of President Duterte in Congress. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. I'd like to thank those who are watching online and our speakers today, Teddy, MP Rome, and of course, Miate Dawa, wherever you are, keep safe. Thank you for your courage, and we do appreciate your time and for making the effort and for your words. We thank you for sharing with us your situation and those of your colleagues. And as mentioned, for those who are unable to ask and send their questions, and the questions that I'm not able to ask today, you can send them to info@aseanmp.org and they will be answered accordingly. Again, thank you very much. I wish the very best for all of you. Stay safe, stay vigilant. This is Jamela again. Goodbye for now.
Thank you, Jamela.
Thank you, Jam.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Ingat. Bye.